So the state has gone through an oil bust. The price decline was as severe as what we had in the 80s. Yet we have had no recession. So we have weak growth, but we have been quite resilient, as Rob told you. So what I'm going to do here is update you on where we are and what we expect to go from here. All right. So Texas grew at a pretty healthy clip in the last 5 years. And last year, despite that collapse in oil prices, we actually grew at a very high rate of 3.6%, and we added about 412,000 jobs. But we started seeing the impact of those low oil prices this year, and our growth has weakened. Right now, through August, we grew about 1.1%. And added only about 83,600 jobs. So, in fact, in August, when the August numbers came in, which was this past Friday, Texas lost jobs. So in addition to oil prices, one of the other factors affecting the economy is the strong dollar. And the outlook is somewhat cloudy. We don't expect growth to accelerate this year. Our forecast right now has been revised down to 1% growth for the year, given the numbers that we have right now. So that means about 118,000 jobs for the year, for 2015. So Texas grows faster than the U.S. on average. And here what you see is the bars are Texas, the line is U.S., and this is quarter-over-quarter growth going back to 2010. But if we went back further, it would still be the same picture. We grow faster, especially during oil booms, because high oil prices are good for Texas, but not for the national economy. But you see in 2015 that this has changed. We fell short of the nation's employment growth. First quarter was really weak, less than 0.5 percentage point of growth. Second quarter, about 1.4, and here in the third quarter, which is just July and August, again 1.4, and it's less than the nation's rate of growth for the year. Now, this has been a tale of two economies. Goods versus services. And what you see here is the growth month over month for every month. The blue is total non-farm, the green is service producing, and the red is goods producing. And you see that the goods producing sector lost jobs about 6 months in a row for a total of about 63,000 jobs through August. The service providing sector was actually pretty okay, 2.6% growth, added about 147,000 jobs. So there is a difference between the two sectors. Now, the August data just came in Friday, as I said, and you can see the August data there. That goods producing sector decline accelerated in August, and you see that the service sector was actually quite weak growth in August. And these are all annualized numbers, and you see the negative growth for Texas as a whole. So this is a bit more granular look at that data. So this is looking at the different sectors and who lost jobs, who gained jobs. Each bar here is quarter-over-quarter growth, and the last one, the hash one, is third quarter, just July and August. And the way I've arranged these is from the largest sector, which is trade, transportation, and utilities, which is about 20% of the share of total employment, all the way down to information, oil and gas and information, which is 2.3 and 1.7%. So what you see is in the third quarter, the energy sector continued to lose jobs. The August numbers, we had a negative 3,500, and overall energy jobs losses were about 32,000 for the year. The construction sector added a small number of jobs in the third quarter, about 700, but my fellow panelists will talk about real estate and construction, so we'll hear from them. I'm not going to go into that. The manufacturing sector, which is sort of the peachy color, that sector lost jobs 7 months in a row, and so for a total of about 28,000 jobs for the year. 26,000 of those were in durable goods, namely in fabricated metals and in machinery. So these are some of the sectors that are actually pretty related to oil and gas. So you see the weakness there. And also remember that about 25% of manufacturing jobs are related to the export sector. So which sectors grew? Well, you can see leisure and hospitality. That sector grew about 5.6%. and added, that's a light blue, added about 45,000 jobs. And the majority of that is coming from restaurants. So you might say that maybe people are spending some of their gasoline savings on eating out. It's conjecture. It's followed by health, and that's the purple line, grew about 4.7%, added 42,000 jobs. And here, the increased insurance coverage has, I think, increased the demand for healthcare and has added jobs there. Now, our unemployment rate went down actually in August, even though we lost jobs. It went down to 4.1%. And the reason for that is it fell because workers that are coming out of the energy industry are leaving the labor force and leaving the state, actually. So our labor force went down. But we're also hearing of shortages still in some skilled, especially for specialty skills in electrical engineering, software engineering, diesel mechanics, welders, but also in some low-skilled jobs such as machinery and food manufacturing. So we are still seeing some shortages. Looking at the different metros, well, some cities are doing better than others. Here you see Midland, Odessa. Last year, they were the fastest growing cities, grew about 8.7%, twice the Texas average. But of course, they've lost jobs this year. And then you see Houston, and Houston, year to date now, has lost about 1,700 jobs. And this, of course, is consistent with the concentration of energy jobs and energy manufacturing in Houston. But I think it also speaks to the increased diversity of Houston, that this number is only 1,700. If we were in the 80s, this would have been a huge number. So then, in contrast to Houston and Midland, Odessa, you see Dallas and you see Austin growing very fast, continuing to grow very fast. In Dallas, the relocation of Toyota, of State Farm, of Liberty Mutual has really helped growth here. And the most of the jobs are in, again, the service sector. You see it in professional and business services, you see it in healthcare and restaurants. Dallas added 49,000 jobs through August this year, so that's a huge number. Now, Texas housing market is still pretty healthy. Where you see the effect of oil prices is in the office market, and you see that here. Vacancy rates in the office market in the 4 largest metros of the state, and they continue to fall in Dallas and in San Antonio, sort of flattened out in Austin, but you see Houston, they continue to go up, and they haven't peaked yet. Texas exports have been relatively weak this year. They fell slightly in July, and they are down about 8% year over year. So the decline reflects 2 main factors. One is weaker global demand. The other is the appreciation of the dollar. And the pie chart shows you where we send our exports. So Texas is the #1 exporting state in the country. We send about 37% of our goods to Mexico, 10% to Canada, 11% to the European Union, 15% to Asia, 16% to Latin America, and 5% to China. And most of our trading partners' economies are weak. Mexico's growth has been quite slow. Canada and the Latin American economies are in recession. Europe is getting better, but China is slowing. So, and of course, the strength of the dollar isn't helping our exports either. You see there the Texas trade-weighted value of the dollar. That is the value of the dollar against the currencies of the countries that we trade with, weighted with the share of trade with them. And dollar appreciation hurts our exports. So you see that exports started declining as the dollar appreciated. And our contacts tell us that dollar appreciation is hurting the capital equipment industry in general, and high-tech in particular. PC and communication infrastructure investment, or rather demand from China, has really slowed. And looking at the oil industry, of course, oil prices at 45 put a damper on energy activity in Texas. The rig count started falling in November of last year, down about 60% now at 365 rigs, down from 906, I think it was, in November. And We don't have the, I don't have the September number for the Permian and the Eagle Ford. These are August numbers, but you can see that Eagle Ford rigs have been coming down since November. The Permian rigs were also down, but then they sort of moved back up a little bit in May when prices went up to $60. But you see that they've sort of flattened again right now. When you talk to our contacts in the Permian, they tell us that they are not drilling in Tier 3 and Tier 2 areas anymore. It's just Tier 1 areas where it's the most productive. So the silver lining has been that, of course, as drilling activity fell, the costs have also fallen for the producers. The suppliers have reduced costs. Texas oil production hit a maximum in March of this year, so that's the blue line. We were producing 3.64 million barrels per day in March, and you see that it's come down since then. The June number is 3.46 million barrels per day, so that's about 200,000 barrels less than what we had in March. And if you look at the U.S. numbers, the U.S. is actually down in June by about 2 million barrels per day from the high in April, I think it was. Okay, one other chart is to illustrate the impact of the declining energy industry. What you see here are continuing unemployment claims by industry. And the pie charts shows you the share by industry. And mining, that's oil and gas in Texas, is about 10% of all continuing claims. But that line that you see going up there, the energy industry has been about 50%, has accounted for more than 50% of the increase in claims since December. So it's a pretty large share for the industry. You have to remember that oil and gas is only 2.3% of total employment, so this is a huge number. And this is the impacts of the layoffs in the energy industry. The good news is that they have started to turn down. Of course, with the job losses that we saw in August, we may see these budge back up again. We'll see what happens when the numbers come out. Okay, I see Pat rising, and I will finish up. So the plunge in oil prices has slowed growth in Texas. As I said, year to date, 1.1%. In the third quarter, July came in really strong, but then August, we lost jobs. The headwinds continue to be low oil prices, a strong dollar, plus weak growth in our trading partners' economies, Asia, Canada, Latin America. As far as oil prices go, I think the risks are on the downside still. We will see, I think, Iran coming in at the beginning of 2016. China is slowing. And even though U.S. output has started to fall, there's a lot of supply out there. So I think we will see, I think the downside risks are higher. The tailwind, of course, is the U.S. economy, which is still doing quite well. So with the August data, as I said, we've revised down our growth for employment for Texas to 1%. And so that's with the data that we have right now, which means no acceleration of growth. This is much, much lower than our traditional average, but we are still expecting positive growth for the year. So I leave you with sort of a positive picture. Thank you.
As Pat mentioned, I do come from the commercial construction industry. I've been a part of Balfour Beatty for 26 years, 10 years of that as the national CFO, then the president for a number of years, and now the CEO for the last couple of years. If you're not familiar with Balfour Beatty, we are part of a global construction organization. Our U.S. headquarters is here in Dallas. We've got operations, like Pat just mentioned, in Dallas in most of the cities, which is in the U.S., which is great because I get a perspective of that. And we do about $4 billion a year in the U.S. So we are construction managers. We go at risk to build big things. We are largely full of professional construction management individuals, and we take responsibility to deliver to cost, to scale, to scope the projects that we are entrusted. Pat mentioned some of the Dallas projects. You might recognize some of our U.S. projects as most of the theme hotels at Disney, the Atlantis Resort in the Bahamas, Seattle Space Needle, Mayo Clinic, things like that are things that we specialize in. So anyway, it's an honor to be here, and I got to tell you, it was wonderful to hear your presentation. The great thing is I don't have to be an expert on all those statistics. The reason they brought me here is to give you a perspective from what I see every single day, because our number one determinant of success is to know where the money is going to go in the U.S. And we've got to be there years before it gets there, or we miss the opportunity to get those projects and to get into that industry. So it's our job to know where the money's really going to go. And in every one of our cities, we have people that are dedicated to listening to information like you just heard and soaking up all the market forecasts and the statistics. I'm not going to offer you much from that perspective. You've just heard a lot there. But the other half of how we succeed is because we're in with the major corporations and the city leaders and the commercial developers, and we're working with their capital plans 10 years in advance to be able to understand where are they going to go. And so that's probably the perspective that I can offer you that might be helpful. So I was asked to talk about two things. What do you see from a construction perspective, and what's happening in the construction industry? So I'm going to talk about three things. I'm going to offer you my perspective, talk a little bit about some exciting innovation. The construction industry is going through a tremendous revolution right now. It's full of opportunity, whether you want to participate in it or whether you want to service it. It's full of opportunity. And then I'll tell you a little bit about some needs we have in the talent area. So first, what do I know about the economy from the construction sector? First thing I would tell you is, even though you heard about some headwinds, I promise you, Texas is the hottest market in the U.S., and it's going to stay that way for a while. We work, all the corporations that you mentioned, we get to work with years in advance before they even announce. We've got the opportunity to build the Liberty headquarters, and so we get to work with those organizations. Of all the cities in the U.S., there is no more activity going on anywhere than those corporations that are evaluating coming to Dallas right now. There are many in the planning works, there's many in the evaluation works, and it's like nothing else. And one of the things that I see is with all the other markets, they tend to rise and fall because of a sector, right? An oil sector in Houston gets hot or whatever the case may be. I don't think that's what's driving the North Texas economy. From what I can tell, it's structural. I mean, there are structural things in Dallas that are going to keep it strong for a long time. So you've got, a business-friendly Texas, right, all ready to start out with. But you've got, the availability of land to develop. You've got a cheap cost of living. Most of all, you've got an absolute abundance of educated, skilled labor like no place else in the U.S. You've got ease of access to other places in the U.S. There's no other city that has those dynamics. So we also work up in the Midwest and places like that. Those cities are losing, in the last decade, they've lost 20 to 40% of their populations. 20 to 40%, and they're all coming to Texas, to be honest. So tremendous things there are going on. So I do think it's here to stay for quite some time, even if we do face some headwinds. I think some of the most interesting things will be some of the challenges that Dallas faces over the next couple of years, because we also get to see some of those. For instance, on the infrastructure side, we have an infrastructure business as well. And on the infrastructure side, as well planned as the city of Dallas is, it's still going to be very strained over the next 10 years, because I don't think anybody envisioned the type of growth that has come. The highways, right, the roads, et cetera. Water's a big issue for Texas. We do water facilities as well. Dallas is going to have water issues as well. And I think it's got one other issue that it'll have to face, and that is it is still what I call a politely segregated city between the north and the south, right? And it's kind of just lived that way for quite some time. As that growth continues to come on, it's going to continue to strain that dynamic. I applaud the folks that are developers and do have vision that are working on developing south of where we are right now, because there are some great things going on. So anyway, that's the first thing I'd tell you is, even if you get a little bit bummed out because you say it's maybe not quite as good as it has been or could be, it's better than any place else. The only other cities, and we're in almost all of them, the only other cities that I would say rival Dallas, and they really don't come close, from a city planning standpoint, maybe a Denver, maybe a Charlotte. Cities like that are also well positioned for growth, but nothing like Texas. So that'd be the first thing. The second thing that I'd tell you about from an economy standpoint is, in a very less sophisticated way than what you just articulated. I've been in the industry for 26 years. I've lived through now 3 recessions and kind of the ups and downs. And we've kind of, in the construction industry, we've got our own little construction cycle clock. that tells us what's coming and how long things are going to be good and where to be. You may laugh at this, but we kind of equate it to a 24-hour day, right? And so at night, when it's dark and all the private developers and all the private markets are asleep, the federal government is spending like crazy. When they don't have money, they're still spending like crazy, right? And that's exactly what happened in the last recession. And then what's interesting is as long and as deep as that recession was, year after year we said, when are we coming out? When are we coming out? But what's interesting, and this happens every time, about 12 to 18 months before we start to, quote, officially come out, here comes all the corporate money it's been built up on the shelves. It starts to kind of rally for recovery and invest for recovery. And it's not daylight yet. These guys are still before the dawn, and they're starting to invest that money. And our clients, Microsoft, Amazon, Intel, all these clients start just pooling their money and building in fab centers and big things because they can tell. They half create it and they can half, I think, just sense when it's coming. And they kind of pool up like a bunch of salmon getting ready to go upstream. And so that's what happened this time. And then as soon as the daylight comes, here comes all the commercial developers, right? Because they're too skittish to come out when it's dark. But as soon as it's light, they come out because they got to make hay. They know they got to make hay. They got one day to make hay, and the sophisticated ones know to get out there and get going. And that's exactly what happened, right? And then the next people that come out sometime in the afternoon of the day are what I call, the really speculative money. To be honest, we kind of call that the stupid money because it's kind of the less disciplined money. And all of a sudden, there's these wild dreams out there, and people that are not really experienced in these markets start putting money into it. That's when you know it's not far till dark again. And so I know you're probably laughing at my unsophisticated way of thinking, but it really works. It's been the way. And so the question is, okay, what do you see? What time is it now? And from our way of looking at it, it feels to us like it's kind of early afternoon, which may sound really bizarre, and I'll tell you why. Because our big corporate clients, they're still aggressively planning on investment in this cycle. They are still aggressively ready to put down the money and go forward. The commercial developers are still on the front end of much of their planning and thinking, right? And to be honest, the stupid money hasn't shown up too much yet. So, I realize everyone says it's a different world than it used to be, and I think in many ways it is, but I think in other ways it's the same old world, right? Same old cycle. So that's a little bit what we see. Two markets that I thought I might mention because they're getting more interesting in Texas. One is the multifamily market, apartments and condos, cranes all over this state. That part is not unique to Dallas. Every major city in America looks like that. It's insane how much multifamily apartment and condo work is going on. We got a chance, again, we saw it coming, so we actually organized a business around it years before it got here. We went into it big time. We do about $1 billion worth of work at any one time in the multifamily world. We've actually started to pull back from that quite a bit. There's still good things going on. There's still good deals to be had. There's plenty of them. But we're getting much more choosy because I do think this is a market that I think we're somewhere in the final third stretch of this run of multifamily. And it's a funny market. I don't think one can say, well, it's 6 months away or it's a year away. I don't think it's 6 months away. I think it's probably at least a year away before you start to see it tail off. But then sometime, I think right after, and from all the information we have, I do think it starts to pull back a little bit. The other market, I'm getting the hurry up. Wow, I can get through 1 point. So the only other one I was going to mention to you is, let me tell you 1 point on innovation. I do want to tell you just one little plug for our industry. It's a time of revolution. There's lots of exciting things going on. So our industry has been less sophisticated than most for a long time. But the great thing is it's really coming into its own with technology and supply chain management, many of these things. So the typical building, like this building right here, probably a $200 million building, is built with 40% of waste in it, which means $80 million was wasted by the lack of sophisticated technology, supply chain management, collaboration, all those things that other industries have come on to. Our industry is coming onto it very, very quickly, which is creating huge opportunities to serve it if you're in an organization that can serve it with lean technologies or whatever the case may be. But it's also creating a great opportunity for talent. My last plug on talent, because I'm getting the real quick hook, is we are underserved by women and minorities. Everybody talks about the local skilled labor, and that's clearly a need. At the management, at the leadership level, we need women, we need minorities, and we are aggressively looking for those. It's got great opportunity. So with that, hopefully I got close to my 12 minutes. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you, Pat, and thank you, everyone. It's quite an honor to be here. Yeah, as Pat mentioned, Keller Williams, this is our 32nd year in business. We started in Austin, Texas, and are now the largest in the U.S. Actually largest in the world. We became largest in the U.S. last year. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about digging a little deeper into the real estate market. We're going to look at some of the sales trends and prices. We're also going to look at a couple of the leading indicators that we have access to and that we have visibility in, and what they suggest for the market coming up. We're also going to talk about the real estate as an employment driver. We'll get to talk not just about the positive construction activity that we just heard about from Mark, but also about the real estate's role in the growing professional services sector. And then we're going to look at a couple of trends that we're paying close attention to: affordability and student loan debt. So, Pat mentioned earlier that that we are the largest, and we're actually at 127,000 agents as of the first of this month. We did, as I mentioned, we did start here in Austin, or down in Austin, Texas. I forgot I flew up here early today, so I'm in Dallas now. We have about 15,000 agents in Texas, and that includes about 4,000 in this area, in the greater Dallas area. Our model supports large offices, so when you think of a typical real estate office, it might be 20 or 30 agents. We have over 300 agents in our Frisco office, over 400 in our Plano office, over 500 in our Preston Road, and then more than 600 in Arlington. And then we have a large one in Fort Worth, and some of our people are here today, so thank you for being here. We have a pretty good pulse on the market because of having these boots on the ground and a lot of transactions that we have access to. So let's start looking at home sales. Now, the green line is the national trend line, and the blue line is the Texas line. The main takeaway from this graph really is that the national real estate sales have not quite returned to the pre-recession levels, but you'll see Texas homes have recovered completely. We are back. In fact, we're now rising above where we were. Looking at the same data from a different angle, you can see that for the past 2 years, Texas has significantly outpaced the national market. Yet, because of tailwinds from the drop in oil prices that we heard about earlier, we expect growth next year to be closer to the national average. So we'll start to see that probably slow down. Let's take a look at the major markets in Texas: Austin, Dallas, and Houston. The big outlier here is Houston. Actually has negative growth year to date, and again, mostly in response to the drop in oil prices and the accompanying loss of high-paying energy jobs. It's worth emphasizing, though, that Houston is a very resilient market. The economy is diversified, much more so than I think people realize, and the softening oil demand has definitely taken some of the air out of that market, but we don't see anything dramatic happening. We've also we'll touch on the quantity of homes that are selling. That's what the last graph was. This represents prices. Once again, the green line is the U.S. prices, and the blue is Texas. And that big sort of camel's hump there, that was the bubble, the housing bubble in 2008. Now note the corresponding lack of a bubble or a hump in the Texas line. Now I'm from Southern California, and if California was on here, there would not be a blue line like that. We had a dramatic bubble that burst there. So while the national real estate economy has spent 4 years catching up to where it was, Texas has been going up and up. Median home prices. Here's what's happening with home prices in the major Texas markets. There's no surprise to no one in this room, I'm sure. Dallas prices are accelerating, which is good news for those that are selling properties, and maybe not so good news for someone who's purchasing a property. Why do prices go up? Which is funny for me to ask that question in a room full economists and others. It's supply and demand. And right now we have tight inventory. There has been, with all the construction going on, all the cranes we see in all of our cities, there's still a shortage. In this area, it's partly due to the corporate relocations that were mentioned earlier, and this area being such an attractive area for job seekers. So the challenge in all of this growth is affordability. And Dallas has been getting less and less affordable the past few years. And that has implications for the area's ability to continue to attract the young and creative workers who will fuel the region's long-term growth. Quickly, let's touch on the inventory and housing starts. Inventory is simply a measure of the time it takes for a property to sell. Economists generally consider it to be a balanced market when there's between 4 and 6 months worth of inventory. As you can see, Dallas in orange is veering towards 2 months of inventory, so it's definitely a hot market, what we would call a strong seller's market. Houston, for the reasons we covered, is moving in the opposite direction, and that will still be, although it's moving in the opposite direction, it's still a relatively strong market. Now, here's what housing starts are in Texas. And as you can see, there's more single-family homes being built than multifamily homes, which I know for me in Austin is a little surprising, because when I see the cranes and the high-rises going up, it looks like there's just an incredible amount of multifamily construction going on, and I'm sure the same here in Dallas. But because of the availability of land, our communities are getting wider and broader. Housing starts in Texas, as I said, are right now being outpaced by single-family home, and there's probably not enough of either. We're still the market's still able to absorb a lot more than we have going on, and that's evidenced by how we see prices reacting. Now, mortgage rates. All of this gets affected by mortgage rates. And I'm not going to say a lot about this because, quite frankly, there's a lot more people in this building that are more knowledgeable than I am about it. But I do want to point out that if and when the Fed raises rates, there will still be things will be very affordable by historical rates. When Gary Keller started in real estate in the early 1980s, interest rates were in the 17% range. When I started in the late 80s, they were still way up into the double digits. The blue bar represents the historical average from 1990 to 2007. And the orange bar represents the rates that we've been experiencing in the past few years. So even if rates go up 0.25%, 0.5%, or even a full percent, it's still cheap money from a historical standpoint, and still makes it a good time for people to be able to invest in real estate. And if there happens to be anyone in this room that's interested in that, I know a few people that can help you. So the last data-intensive slide that we'll look at is student loan debt. Now, you may not immediately think of how this relates to real estate, but we do look at it, and it does have an impact. And basically, the debt load that students are graduating with affects the kind of homes they buy and can qualify for, and it certainly delays when they do get into the housing market. And that has an impact or a ripple effect on the real estate market. So looking into the future, we don't talk about this a lot, but as a company that handles more than 10% of the real estate transactions in the U.S., we have visibility into a couple of pretty strong indicators, and this seems to be like a good audience to share some of those insights with. We have a unique operating system where on a single day of the month, every month, we get transmitted to us all of the data from all of our offices around the world and all of our agents in those offices. So we get a tremendous amount of information. Two things that we look at that are leading indicators for us are, one is our listings taken. Now, those are properties that an agent has signed an agreement on that will be going on the market in the next 30 or 60 days. Basically, the seller has chosen a Keller Williams agent, and they want to get their home sold. If it happens to be in Dallas, it goes on the market, and that's sold pretty quickly. In North Texas, listings taken for August was up 24% over this time last year. So for comparison, listings taken in all of the U.S. and Canada is up about 15%. That means there's a lot more homes coming on the market in Dallas than there were last year. Now, I mentioned earlier that there still seems to be a shortage, or there still is a shortage, which is driving prices up and affordability down. That means things are just selling faster, or as fast as they're coming on. The second leading indicator we look at is what we call contracts written. And these are contracts that someone has written to purchase a property, and these properties will close in the next 30 or 60 or 90 days. And this is a really strong indicator of how much money, well, number one, how much money real estate agents are going to make, but also how much home sellers, home inspectors, title companies, mortgage lenders, and all the people involved with the transaction are going to be impacted by. In North Texas, our contracts written for August was up 23% over last August, which again is a very strong growth number. And these transactions represent, at minimum, like I said, 2 to 3 more months of very, very predictable numbers, but probably another 2 or 3 or 4 months beyond that of activity, because when properties sell, it creates move up and move down buyers, and the dominoes continue to fall. Now, all these sales are good news for agents and franchise owners. Our commissions are up about 20% year over year. Our owner profit for our franchise owners is also up about 20%. So from our perspective, real estate's looking good in Texas and throughout the U.S. Now, in recent months, as a company, we have hit all-time records in almost every major category that we track. And we're cautiously optimistic about next year. Now, that being said, every day that you're in a good market also means you're one day closer to the next adjustment. And we think we are probably closer to the next shift than we were coming out of the last one. Now, what does that mean in terms of time frame? I don't have a crystal ball any more than anyone else. But we do believe in the next 12 to 24 months, many parts of the country will start to feel a change and a shift in the market. In the past 12 months, KW agents, and remember, we're basically about 10% of the industry. Our agents have handled over 800,000 transactions on either the buy side or the sell side for homeowners and home buyers, totaling almost $200 billion and about $6 billion in commissions. So we've seen a lot of growth in the numbers of agents. Those agents are building bigger and bigger businesses. Our offices are continuing to grow, which is all reflective of the strength of the real estate market. Our agents are forming teams. They're creating businesses that expand into additional markets, which is a relatively new trend in our industry. And the best of those agents are using technology, as Mark said, in the construction industry, same in our industry, a tremendous amount of innovation going on that is absolutely having a positive impact on the customer experience and in the home buying and home selling process. So it's an exciting time for us to be in real estate. We are extremely excited to have a big percentage of our business in the state of Texas because it's such a strong market. I am honored again to get to be here and speak with you, and thank you very much.
My story and the story of Compass is we're going to talk about healthcare costs, which seem incredibly Byzantine and complicated. And so, like I said, after lunch, you all are doing a fantastic job of staying awake. So at Compass, we provide tools and support for healthcare consumers. We're part of an employer's employee benefits package where we actually work with the employees to find them high-quality healthcare that's also cost-effective as well. And we do that through a combination of technology and with people. And it's really somewhat of a Texas entrepreneurial story as well. This is a bootstrapped company that now has 300 people. We've hired 100 FTEs just this year, so we're 100 out of those 86,000 jobs that you talked about. And our office is just right at Oak Lawn and Cedar Springs. We support 2,000 employers across the country, so big names like T-Mobile. They've got an office up in Frisco, but a lot of bastions of North Texas businesses like Southwest Airlines, Brinker International, which is Chili's and Maggiano's, Atmos Energy, which is the largest publicly traded natural gas company, TXU and Encore, and the list kind of goes on and on. So just a wonderful clients. It's about 2 million people that we support nationally. Okay, so just to give you an idea of healthcare stats as a snapshot, So this is according to the Kaiser Family Foundation. So family healthcare coverage costs just shy of $17,000 a year. Of that $17,000, workers pay about $4,800 of that, and employers pay $1,200. For employers, it typically is their third largest cost item after payroll and other inputs. It increased by 3% in 2014, and it's projected to increase 5% per year for the next 10 years. So if you do the math on that, that means in 10 years, healthcare costs are going to be 63% higher, which would put family coverage at $27,000 a family, of which the worker would pay just shy of $8,000, and you, the employers in the room, are going to be paying over $19,000 for that. And of course, the 800-pound gorilla is health reform that has happened. And the important thing to understand about health reform is that when it was passed, it was said that it would not add a dime to the federal deficit. Now, how is that possible? That's possible because the actual cost for subsidies and increased health insurance enrollment through the Affordable Care Act was achieved by decreasing Medicare reimbursement in the future. Right? So the government is going to pay doctors and hospitals less in the future. So Medicare payments are going to go down. And what happens is that all doctors and hospitals then use employers and privately insured patients to cross-subsidize their decreased Medicare payments. So that means that as doctors and hospitals get paid less by Medicare, they're going to in turn charge employers more. So that's part of the reason why it's projected to increase by more than about 5% per year for the next 10 years. So that gets us to the point about health and healthcare spending. So healthcare spending and health are two very different things. So this is according to the Bipartisan Policy Center that said that what makes us healthy is actually 50% behavior, 20% environment, 20% genetics, and only 10% access to care. But then what do we actually spend money on as it relates to our health? Well, it's the exact opposite. We spend 88% on medical services and only 4% on healthy behavior and 8% on other. That's like trying to get an education and spending a whole bunch of money on fancy backpacks and computers in lots of schools, but then not doing your homework, right? So it's a combination. I mean, yes, you need to have fancy backpacks, but you got to do your homework as well, okay? So it's important to separate out health from healthcare spending, okay? And within that healthcare spending, this is a famous statistic, it's estimated that 30% of all healthcare spending is waste. And again, this is from the Bipartisan Policy Center and the Institute of Medicine as well. And so that 30% of waste of the almost $3 trillion a year adds up to $765 billion annually. And then the Institute of Medicine broke it out into these separate buckets. And so certain buckets employers cannot necessarily impact, right? Employers can't do much about fraud. They can't necessarily do too much about excessive administrative costs at doctors, hospitals, or insurance companies themselves, but they can do something about unnecessary services, inefficiently delivered services, prices that are too high, and missed prevention opportunities. So essentially 4 out of these 6 buckets of U.S. healthcare waste actually can be impacted by employers and employees. Okay, so I'm going to tell you where healthcare costs come from, and it's a very simple equation, okay? Healthcare costs equal the price per unit times the number of units. So in other words, you would add up what's the price of an MRI, and then you multiply that by the number of MRIs. What's the price of an office visit times the number of office visits? And you would add that all up, and you would get an individual employer's healthcare expense, or you would get a state's healthcare expense, or you would get the country's healthcare expense, right? So whenever you think about healthcare costs, it's price of units times the number of units. Well, the Journal of the American Medical Association did a very interesting study back in 2013. They said, okay, well, what's driving it? And they found that the top 4 drivers of rising U.S. healthcare costs were the price of hospital services, the price of professional services, which is another way of saying doctor services, physical therapy services, other allied health professional services, the price of drugs, and administrative costs, okay? So notice what's not on this list. Increased utilization or the number of units is not the reason for increased healthcare costs. Healthcare costs are rising because healthcare prices are rising. Okay, that's an important dynamic to understand for employers. The price of healthcare costs are rising because the price of healthcare is rising. All right, so then that begs the question, where do these healthcare prices come from? Okay, so I am now going to spend the next 5 minutes making every single one of you in this room an expert in where healthcare prices come from, okay? So you will know more than like 99.9% of the population when it comes to this, okay? So if you don't remember anything else from what I say today, remember this. The price of healthcare services is very different depending on where you receive care locally, even within network. Okay, what does that mean? That means like at one in-network facility, an MRI could cost $1,240. At another in-network facility in the same town, it could cost $527. For the price of a GI endoscopy, that's like for a colonoscopy or an upper endoscopy, at one in-network facility would cost $28.50. At another in-network facility would cost $527. Oh, by the way, if you like your Dr. Anderson, your gastroenterologist, and you don't want to change from your Dr. Anderson, your gastroenterologist, oh, by the way, he performs procedures here on Monday and procedures here on Tuesday. So you don't even necessarily have to change doctors, okay? So, and then this is for a total knee replacements. In-network facility 1, it would cost $57,000 for a total knee replacement. At in-network facility number 2, it would cost $29,000, a $28,000 difference. Both of these facilities are in the DFW area, and they're both on the same street. Okay, so you might have heard of like medical tourism, where you can like go to India or Costa Rica to get surgery. Well, you can kind of have domestic medical tourism where you just drive down the street, right? Okay, so now I'm going to take you to the negotiating table between healthcare providers and insurance carriers, so that determines where these prices come from. Okay, so I'm really going to be pulling back the curtain here. Okay, so this is what literally happens at the negotiating table. So Hospital A says, look, I want really good reimbursement for my imaging, for my MRIs or my CT scans. I want $1,240 for every scan. Insurance company says, okay, we'll do that, but you got to give us something somewhere else in the contract. And they say, okay, well, we'll take much lower reimbursement on our orthopedic surgery, like total knee replacements. We'll do a knee replacement for 29 grand. Say, oh, that's pretty good, okay? Insurance company goes across town to Hospital B, and they have the exact opposite conversation. Hospital B says, well, look, I'll do a CT scan for $527. Insurance network says, oh, that's great, that's a good deal. But then the hospital comes back and says, but I want $57,000 for every single knee replacement that I do, okay? So now you repeat that dynamic of horse trading for labor and delivery, endoscopy, implantables like pacemakers and stents, outpatient surgery, MRIs, med-surg stay rates for just staying over the night in the hospital for like a pneumonia. And what you have is in aggregate, the discount at Hospital A is 50%, and in aggregate, the discount at Hospital B is 50%. And so, but it's filled with like 80%, 20% over here, and then a different 80%, 20% over here. So people say to me, Dr. Bricker, which is the most cost-effective hospital in town? And I say, well, it depends, right? It depends upon what you're having done. So you can't look at discounts in the aggregate. You have to look at it for the specific medical service that your employees are having. Okay? So now we all have to get on the same page in terms of terminology, so we'll do that briefly. Okay? The price equation is billed charges are then run through that contract that we just talked about, and that's what gives you the final price. So billed charges for a doctor or a hospital comes from something called the charge master, and that's a list of all the different tests or procedures that are done at that particular facility. So like aspirin, $3, bag of IV saline, $110, 30 minutes of OR time, $3,000. And all of those different charges, they roll up to codes, some of which are called a CPT code, which is a procedure code. So every single code that's done in healthcare has a 5-digit CPT code assigned to it. Okay, those charges are then run through the contract or the reimbursement methodology, or what's referred to as the discount, right, that the network has negotiated with the hospital. And then after you run that through the discount or the reimbursement methodology or the contract, then you get the final allowed amount or the contracted rate. That's the real price. So sometimes you'll hear news stories or you'll read a story in the news about prices, and they'll be talking about this, okay? And those are not the real prices. The real prices, what you as an employer want to know about, is this, the allowed amount or the contract rate after it's been run through the contract. Okay? So then, what are those contract terms? Well, there's various ones. There's case rates, percentage charge, stop loss, and carve-outs. So I talked to the head of benefits at a Fortune 20 technology company, and she said to me, okay, well, that's all very interesting, Dr. Bricker, but can you tell me which hospitals use case rates and which ones use percentage charge? The answer is it doesn't work that way. Essentially, all healthcare providers use a combination of these for their various services. So now, I'm going to make you a very brief expert in these, because this is important. This is where the actual prices come from. So for a case rate, the price is negotiated for a specific test or procedure independent of billed charges, oftentimes used for CTs or MRIs, right? So let's say you're getting an MRI. Hospital A will bill $3,000 for that MRI, but they have a contracted case rate for $2,000, so that case rate equals the final price of $2,000. Hospital B charges $1,500 for an MRI, but their contracted case rate is for a flat $1,000, so the final price is equal to the case rate, $1,000. Pretty simple, right? So then the next question is, at which hospital did you save more money, A or B? Well, you save more money at A, right? You save $1,000 here, but you only save $500 here, right? So you should feel real good about that, right? No. So you're going broke saving money, right? So you don't want to look at the quote unquote discount. You want to look at the actual contracted rate of the price. Okay. Next one, percent of charge. So this is what people typically think about when they think about percent discounts. So here the price is determined based on a percentage of the billed charges that is negotiated. This is oftentimes used for things like outpatient surgery. So let's say like arthroscopic knee surgery. You hurt yourself water skiing on Lake Louisville or something, okay? So hospital A will bill $1,500 for that arthroscopic knee surgery. They've negotiated a 75% reimbursement rate. So that's like the equivalent of a 25% discount. So the final price is just $1,500 times 0.75 gets you to $1,125, right? Pretty simple. Hospital B bills $6,000 for an arthroscopic knee surgery. Their contract isn't as good. They have to give up 50%. They got to do a 50% discount, right? So 0.5 times 6,000 gets you $3,000, okay? So again, I ask you, at which hospital did you save more money? Well, you got a better discount at hospital B, so you should send all your employees to hospital B, right? No, right? So that's where it's important not only to look at the contract discounted rate, but it's important to look at the billed charges as well. Okay. Carve-outs. Billed charges have a specific line item for a device or medication that has a separate negotiated price. So this is used for things like a pacemaker. So at Hospital A, they'll bill $10,000 for the nurses, the lights, the actual cardiac cath lab, and then they'll have a fixed case rate of $5,000 for that. But then they'll have a line item for the actual pacemaker itself that says, you're going to pay us $10,000 for the pacemaker. So you have to add the $5,000 to the $10,000, and you end up getting a total price of $15,000. At Hospital B, they charge $12,000 for the nurses, the lights, the cath lab, and the pacemaker all in, and they've negotiated a case rate there for $7,500. So again, you would say, okay, well, if you just looked at the case rate, then Hospital A is better, but you have to specifically look at the carve-out for the pacemaker as well when evaluating the price. Okay? Finally, last but not least, stop-loss clause. A price is set at a case rate up to a certain amount of billed charges above which the price changes or flips from a case rate to a percent charge. This is oftentimes used for more complex surgeries that can still be outpatient. Okay, so Hospital A, let's say for an outpatient prostate surgery, charges $20,000, and they've got a fixed case rate of $10,000, so the price is $10,000. Pretty simple, right? Hospital B also has a fixed case rate of $10,000 up to billed charges of $40,000, but as soon as it hits $40,001 of billed charges, the bill flips from a $10,000 case rate to 75% of billed charges. And so therefore, when the bill hits $40,001, you take 40,000 times 0.75, that bill just became a $30,000 bill, right? And guess what? They set up their charges so that they blow through that $40,000 every time, okay? So the point is, billed charges matter. This is where everyone's like, how in the world can you see these stories in the Dallas Morning News and the New York Times? Where do all these incredibly high prices come from? How is that possible? Well, what happens is the healthcare provider looks at their overall costs, and then they look at their existing contract terms, and then they essentially back into, or they reverse engineer, okay, well, what do my billed charges need to be so that when I run them back this way, I need to get paid? Okay, so that's where the $3 aspirin and the $3,000 of OR time come from, right? The aspirin doesn't really cost $3. They just set it up that way so that when they run it through their contracts, it maximizes their reimbursement. Okay, so how does that specifically relate to employers and employees that are in the room? So this is where when Compass gives the price transparency and then steers people to primary care and preventive services through technology and through our health pros, this is for an 11,000 employee energy company here in North Texas. We engaged with 62% of their employees. Look at their preventative exams rate, went from 17% to 62%. Breast cancer screening from 20 to 76, cervical cancer screening from 20 to 70, colonoscopy screening from 11 to 60. As a result of all this preventative care and giving people prices in advance, guess what happened to their healthcare trend? It was flat. Whereas if it had gone up the typical 5% to 8%, it would be up $990. To them, translated into $8 million of savings. And the most important thing that this company said to us was, look at our life insurance claims. They had 8 people die in 2011, 10 in 2012. They had 18 employees die in 2013, and then in 2014 they only had 4 folks. Because people were having their high blood pressure and their diabetes identified early by these preventive care visits, as opposed to the first time they ever realized they had those chronic diseases is when they dropped dead from a heart attack. And that literally was happening in 2013. Okay? So what's the point? In summary, healthcare cost inflation is due to price increases, not increased utilization. Prices are highly variable. Prices are based on provider and insurance contracting, not actual costs, and employer healthcare spend can be brought under control. And with that, I thank you very much.
Is it any wonder we put Dr. Bricker on the cover of our magazine last year? How many of you learned something from what you just heard? Heck yeah, a whole lot of you. I'm going to ask our speakers to please come on onto the stage, and I'm going to ask our volunteers to pick up the questions that, the cards for the questions that are on your table. Jay is going to be leading this once again, and I am going to ask the first question since it is a never-ending issue in Texas. Monet, last week, Moody's came out with a forecast for 2016 that the price of a barrel of oil for U.S. is going to be $52. What's your reaction?
Well, I've learned you do not put a price and a date together in the energy industry. So what the Moody's says, though, is that prices are not going to be going up too much next year. As I said, everybody, I think, looks at it. It's a low-price environment this year and next. I don't know what the number will be, Pat, but I think we're not going to see $70 oil price, I don't think. It's just going to be a low-price environment for a while until the supply gets mopped up.
Very good. Dr. Hartzell.
Yeah, do we have any live questions while I collect cards? Anybody want to do one verbally? Thanks for the help. All right, Gail, thank you. All right, so we'll lead off with one. I'm going to read this live, so hopefully there's no profanity. Will disruptive technologies like Uber or self-driving cars allow or cause a decrease of pressure on Metroplex infrastructure? If no need for no need for mass transit expenditures. So disruptive technologies, Metroplex, infrastructure. What's the connection?
So was the question?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, sure. So the question is, will disruptive technologies like Uber or self-driving cars allow or cause a decrease of pressure on Metroplex infrastructures? So I don't know if any of you may have followed. So New York was going through this debate. So I was in Manhattan, and they were trying to get data out of Uber to understand the number of pickups in, for example, lower Manhattan. And there's a fight going on between the cab drivers and Uber about can the roads of Manhattan accommodate the increased traffic due to Uber. So I think they're asking questions about infrastructure and the new technologies.
I'll take a shot at it.
Okay, and I'll say one more thing after
Sure.
that.
Now, first of all, it's the first time I've ever heard that question posed. The reason I say that is I don't think that it's going to have a significant impact in the immediate future in North Texas. To me, the broader question has always been, will mass transit in some way come to North Texas or come to Houston? And boy, we do mass transit. So we're doing a high-speed rail up in Denver and one in Charlotte and some other places. There just has been very little appetite for it here in North Texas. I mean, about the only thing that's on the table right now is a rail between Dallas and Houston. So no, it just doesn't seem to be picking up any momentum anytime soon.
Not in the conversation, Monet?
The other thing I was going to say was I don't think the demand is there, so you're going to have the service. I don't think it's going to affect infrastructure, but it's going to affect pricing. That's what Uber does. It sort of lowers the cost of cabs and taxis because it brings a competitive element into that. So that's what it does, I think.
So, yeah, part of the New York debate that was interesting was part of what you hit on is part of the question is is it just displacing other rides that would be given, or is it increased riders?
Right.
And one of the debates going on in New York is that Uber, for example, has been arguing that they provide access to parts of the city that other cab drivers won't go. So there's a sort of from their angle, there's a public service element to what they're doing, that their lower income neighborhoods can be served better than they would be by cab. So it's an interesting debate across the country. It's interesting here we haven't heard it in North Texas. Yeah. Okay. So another question. So Dr. Bricker, what about prescription prices? So what can be done there, and what's your take on that?
Yeah, so prescription prices are expected to rise significantly for what are considered specialty pharmacies. So you might have heard, so like there's some recent actual cures for hepatitis C, and it's a series of pills that you take for a month, but that entire course of treatment costs you about $83,000 to do that. And it's essentially because of the patent process and having Gilead Sciences in this case, and AbbVie is the other company that makes it, have a monopoly on these things. And there's other specialty medications that cost literally tens of thousands of dollars to treat specific conditions like multiple sclerosis and rheumatoid arthritis. So it used to be like the old Lipitor for high cholesterol, and there might be an infusion medication that might cost a lot as well. I think the important thing there is that the Southeast Pennsylvania Transit Authority is the first to actually sue Gilead over the pricing. And so I think potentially there's not necessarily going to be any immediate regulatory changes in patent or FDA policy, but you just might see more suits by large employers and public entities against pharmaceutical companies for essentially charging what might be potentially outlandish fees. And by the way, there's precedent for this. Gilead and other companies actually used to charge things like $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 for HIV medication, and it got them such bad press and lawsuits that they ended up dropping the price of that. So it's happened before. We'll see if it happens again.
Thanks. Yeah, we were just, it was an academic conference. I have to plug my finance colleagues. So the title of the keynote at our conference was Financial Engineering Will Be a Cure for Cancer. And what was interesting about it was they were arguing that any one this is way more about than I do, but any one cancer drug trial is not positive in PV. It's too risky. And they were arguing that we should see funds develop to run these things in series so that we can hedge risk.
Yep.
And so he was articulating that the need for a fund that would do these kinds of research so that the risk is hedged across technologies. Okay. Anyway. Okay. Sorry. That's a plug for finance. It went really well with mortgages. So now we're going to move on to healthcare. So next question. This is a question, Mark, that you brought up, and I think that the other panelists can comment on it as well. Why is it important to have women and minorities in leadership positions, and how does that impact Dallas or Texas growth?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple answers to that question from our standpoint. I mean, first of all, the fact that they're not just feels out of proportion with our population, and secondly, we're missing such great talent. Not to give too much of a plug for the construction industry, but I joined the construction. I was going to go the finance route. I'd taken a job with the Brass Brothers, and someone convinced me there was great opportunity in this industry. And that's been the story of my career. And I look at the fact that we have so few women and minorities in leadership, and we are starving for them. I mean, we seek them out, we look for them. So, I think it's just the fact that we're missing all that talent. And it bugs me, and I hate it, the fact that I look at the profile of our business and I say this is just wrong, that we're not attracting them. And I think the issue is it's structurally, I understand why it was an unappealing industry, but now it's these buildings are built on technology and there's such sophistication in the supply chain, et cetera. It's got great career opportunities.
Any other comments on women and minorities in leadership? Yeah, I was at something up here in Dallas. The Deloitte University hosted something, and what part hit me was Deloitte is trying to hire, I think they said 17,000 employees this year, which is crazy when you think about. And they were reaching out to business school deans to try to build relationships, and a lot of the conversation was helping to bring in, they need talent, so you can't discard any talent. And if not all the talent's getting through some sort of filter or pipeline, then you've lost, it's an opportunity cost, right? Could have been done better. So what about, we mentioned water, it came up in one of the earlier discussions that had been talked about at another one of these sort of events. Can you all elaborate on water and what the outlook is for water in the Metroplex and plans for solutions or to address any issues that are there?
I don't know any of the details in terms of water in the Metroplex. I know that it is an important issue for Texas, and last week we heard what the state was trying to do to combat some of these, combat the situation. And they have a long-term plan that they're starting to work on, but I really don't have any details on what's going on.
Yeah, maybe just to put a little bit of broad light on it. So we do water facilities that Balfour does. The nation has a water problem. Texas has a water problem. It has historically solved it with freshwater reservoirs. The problem is to even get close to, getting up to where the population where it would meet the population's needs, it's about a 10-year fix if we started today. And the problem is you can't really rally the support because people don't see the problem. So it's a little bit stuck, to be quite honest. Some places are turning to desalination plants, pulling water out of the ocean. The second one just came online in Southern California. The problem is it's about as expensive as oil these days. It's crazy expensive. So there's not an easy fix. I think people understand the plan. It's the public support for it and the urgency that's becoming the problem.
That's that combination of a problem that takes a long time to fix, but it's not so imminent that that they can move today. All right,
I'll add one more thing, Jay.
please.
I suppose as an economist, one would say if there's a water problem, what you need to do is price it right, and then that'll sort of alleviate some of the problem. That's part of the problem too, I think, that we're not pricing it correctly.
Yeah, it's too cheap.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Back to healthcare. Dr. Bricker, we talked about this idea. I think Pat led off the introduction, the comment that it's an industry we don't know price. So the question is, will we ever get upfront pricing or transparency in pricing in healthcare?
So the short answer is yes, and it's going to happen at several levels. So one, it'll happen at the regulatory level, probably not the federal government, but actually some states are now requiring healthcare providers to make their prices, and not the billed charges, but the actual allowed amounts public to folks. Those states have been places like North Carolina and Minnesota. In Texas, is that going to happen anytime soon? Probably not. Then at the individual private business level, more and more insurers, when they are going to their healthcare providers, they're saying, look, when we negotiate these prices, there's going to be some degree of visibility that we're going to give our customers as it relates to those prices. But the challenge there is that even if you snapped your finger and you immediately knew what the price of everything was, in other words, there was actually the price that it was like a grocery store, right? At a grocery store, you know what an apple is, you know what a banana is. In healthcare, you don't know what a laparoscopic cholecystectomy is, right? And so there's always going to be a medical terminology translation issue that people need help. And this is where companies that have successfully addressed or used healthcare price transparency, whether it's been through HR or through some sort of translating mechanism to actually provide hand-holding concierge support in some ways to assist with that translation of, okay, they told me I needed a gallbladder surgery. Okay, that's actually a laparoscopic cholecystectomy. That's CPT code 24375, and then that's going to be X amount of money. But just to put that on a website is much more harder to translate than an apple is 45 cents.
Any live questions before I've got one more. Please, sir.
Healthcare as well. New England Journal of Medicine a number of years ago predicted that healthcare is going home because its patients prefer it, it's faster, and costs go down. What do you believe is going to be the impact of home healthcare to healthcare costs?
Yeah, and there are so many parts of our lives that are so much better because of technology, and they're so much more convenient, whether you talk about Uber or like everybody's buying a box of stuff these days. You can get a box of clothes, you can get a box of barbecue sauce delivered to your house that's customized. And healthcare's so antiquated, right? You got to call, you got to wait on hold. Yeah, I've got an appointment in 6 weeks. I'm not taking any more patients. It is being disrupted because people are essentially saying it's bizarre. It's Byzantine that I have to access healthcare in this fashion. And so there are probably one of the biggest entrants into this area is a local company called Teladoc, which is the nation's largest telemedicine service. And actually a lot of the companies that we have up there that are clients of ours also have Teladoc as well, so that you can have access to a physician over the phone. Which essentially what that does is that if you have an established relationship with a physician and you think you have some sort of like minor healthcare issue, you can call into that office and it'll be like, yeah, it sounds like a bladder infection. We'll call in some antibiotics. You don't even need to see the physician, right? Something like Teladoc actually mimics that, and it's and that doesn't necessarily save a ton of money, but it saves a ton of time. So companies like law firms where they're billing $1,100 an hour, they don't want their employees spending half a day at the doctor's office to get antibiotics for a bladder infection when they can just call somebody on the phone, get it called into their local CVS, and then they just pick it up on the way home. So there absolutely are movements towards making access to healthcare much more convenient, whether it be at home or through work. And it's just going to happen more, again, because essentially the public has begun to expect so much more service than they're currently getting from the healthcare system.
All right, I've got one last question. So the question is sitting around immigration policy. And we talked about what's on the conversation topics of your organizations, and this can cut across, I think, all three as well. What is the impact or discussion or the conversation around immigration policy and the outlook, whether it's in this construction industry, real estate industry, or healthcare? And is this an issue on your radar, and people talking through the implications of potential issues in immigration? Anybody want it? Softball to finish up. Oh, look at the time. Mark?
No. So it's a big issue in commercial construction, obviously, and you hear these extremes about we're going to go shut off immigration in any one of the forms, and that would simply be devastating. I mean, the reality is the U.S. has not built that workforce. In fact, that workforce has been slowly diminishing in the U.S., and so to not have that immigration pool just would have such, it's going to trickle into economic effects as well. So, I won't sit here and spend time about what is the right answer, but shutting it off is not the right answer.
I'll say, so Texas is the #1 destination for people coming from other states, but also we have a lot of immigration from outside the U.S. And we think that part of the reason we grow so fast is because we have all these immigrants coming into Texas to look for work. So not only in construction, so it's not just people, when they think of immigrants, they think of lower wage immigrants, but that's not necessarily the case. We have immigrants coming in both from the low wage side and also from, say, high tech, high wage side. So this really helps us with the economy in terms of growing it. It's not just low income, it's higher income immigrants too. So it helps us quite a bit.
And anything that impacts industry and business has a domino effect or a ripple effect into the real estate industry. If people are being hurt or having adverse effects, whether it's because of high healthcare costs or lack of workforce, and their businesses are going down, or people are being laid off, or they aren't as profitable as they once were, it impacts their home buying and home investing habits, and that again has a ripple effect on all the related industries to the home buying and home selling process.
Right. How about turn it back over to Pat?
Thank you. For whoever it is that asked the question about water, or if you are a developer, at the back of the room we have some copies of Texas CEO magazine from this year. Back in the March-April issue, we did the entire issue on the topic of water, and it addresses all of the things that everyone spoke about here today. And the last point I'll make about that is one of our most viewed articles online that came out of that issue is about a house that was built by Texas A&M University using the most innovative ways to save water. It's called the Water Sense House, and it is over near Fort Worth. You can walk through any day of the week. It is open to take a look at, and it is an absolute beautiful facility if you haven't had a chance.
We cannot finish on an A&M house.
I was loving that.
I think that's fair. Everybody hook 'em. Everybody hook 'em. All right. And on that note, this is the second of a 4-city tour. Next Friday, you will find us at breakfast at the Houston Federal Reserve Bank facility on Allen Parkway. Breakfast starts at 7 and the event ends at 9:30. There are still a few tickets left, but not very many. So if you have friends or coworkers inside Houston and you want to make them aware of this, we encourage you to do that. And of course, you will find this information on the Texas Enterprise website at the McCombs School of Business. All 4 of these forecast events will be written up inside the November-December issue of Texas CEO magazine. Get your subscription now. And for those of you who attended today, this event was recorded, and you will be receiving a link back for everybody who registered for the lunch today. And so, my thanks to our speakers, Monet, Mark, Chris, Eric, Dr. Hartzell. I thank you all so much. Have a great weekend, everybody.